Anyway, thank you so much for joining us for our 204th Coffee and Conversation. As you can see, every time you set up something with electronics, there's always some little catch. And one of them is we seem to be missing a power supply for one of our laptops. But anyway, I think we can still get through all of this. We're really so fortunate to have with us today Lieutenant Colonel Nellie Paler and Lieutenant Colonel Bear Owen, who are going to give us some insights in what it was like to fight the close-in air support war during Vietnam. For those of us on the ground, and I was with the 25th Infantry, the ability to call in airstrikes when you really needed them, and you could get them there and be certain whether or not you have overcloud, rain, or whatever, made such a difference to everybody. Although I think both in your cases, you were much further up north.
Yeah, right around the northern part of South Vietnam. When we did our close air support, we were right around there, yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, just before we get going, I wanted to highlight our next two Coffee and Conversations coming up as well. But again, for today's will be... Oh, great, not again. See if you can advance it one way or the other. It was working before. Okay. Our next one is going to be a little different. Teresa Smith is going to talk about the work her father had done with the reconstruction of Bent's Old Fort down in the southeast part of our state. That was the original fort Bent's, had to put together for trading with the local Indians and everything. It was totally kind of knocked down at one point in time. And then her father's construction company was given the contract to actually rebuild it. And they had to build it exactly with whatever plans they could get, use the same type of materials and everything. So we'll not only talk a little bit about that, but all the other fascinating historic sites right around that same area. So at some point, if you're looking for an interesting long day trip or maybe a 2-day trip, this is certainly a great area to go see. And moving on, I don't have a picture yet for that, but Bill Froth is an avid reenactor, Civil War, and particularly cavalry, and has gone around to include Gettysburg, participated in mock battles and everything commemorating the role of cavalry during the Civil War. And so he wanted to come and give a special talk as, the date for our presentation is only about a week after, the actual dates when the Civil War was fought. So we hope you'll consider joining us for both of those. And I have others which we're pretty much going to finish the schedule for through August. So again, one more, flip to one more. And again, we always have to highlight all the marvelous foundations and stuff which have helped provide support for our museum. Again, without your direct support through your membership and donations, that's what really helps us do much of our exhibits in here. But again, the additional support through these other foundations have been critical for us. So again, without further ado, Nellie, why don't you start off for us?
Okay.
Oh, now were we going to show the video first?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Okay,
Sure.
We'll see if we can do this.
Okay.
Spotlight's on you, Mike.
Yeah, I know.
You and your best.
It's all right. He shines in the spotlight.
Okay. Now, we may never get back to that.
No, we're in the Marine Corps.
Okay. This is a YouTube video. It should, if we can get it running.
The real crux of what the A6 is about is the fact that the A6 can do it any time, and with the A6E, we can do it with a high degree of reliability. It can be a beautiful day, or it can be a foul night where the ceilings are down at 100 feet and the visibility is a half a mile. It doesn't make any difference. And that's why the A6 is worth its salt.
Bad weather and darkness have been key elements in greatly reducing the advantages of U.S. air power, allowing the enemy to move freely while U.S. planes sat on carrier decks and remote airfields waiting for the weather to clear. With the advent of the A-6E Intruder, however, effective U.S. air power is available round the clock in any weather conditions. One of a kind in the defense inventory, it is the only aircraft capable of penetrating thick ground fog, heavy rains, or intense cloud cover to detect, identify, and attack fixed or moving enemy targets. Electronically, the A-6E is a new airplane with the latest radar, inertial navigation, and computer system, key elements in its all-weather tracking capability. But the first Intruder, the A-6A, flew early in the 1960s and made its mark in Vietnam. Since then, the airplane has gone through an extensive product development program, so that today it is a most versatile weapon system, capable of leading other aircraft into target areas and handling close air support, interdiction, and deep strike missions, with a bomb load second only to the B-52. And with a new CV concept, the A-6E is now being used as an ASW vehicle as well. By keying a radar beacon on the ground with the computer system of the A-6E, close air support can be carried out with an accuracy in air-to-ground weapons that was previously unattainable with a non-radar significant target. To take full advantage of the system's capabilities, Marines have put pilots in the field as forward air controllers to direct beacon operations.
And they know the air side and they know the ground side, and therefore the coordination is extremely good. And the response from the aircraft is good because they're talking to people of their own type.
That's my old squadron. Whiskey Kilo on the tail.
The enemy situation developing, but you haven't got the weather to get any kind of ordnance on the target. What this RAFFAC will do for you, either at night when it's essentially IFR condition or in cloudy weather where you can't see the ground, you can load up a RAFFAC and essentially it's just a transponder, and he can set it up, and with his radar in the A6, the Grumman A-6, he can paint that beacon, you can give him the important information, and he can, from that beacon, get an offset bombing point, pick it up, and destroy the enemy without ever seeing them.
And that's going all the way through up to the DAS. The bird is coming over, making contact, being passed out to the forward air controller, running the strike, and the ordnance on the ground in 33 minutes. These guys will put them anywhere you want them. It's just a question of how close to you do you dare put it.
The A-6 is called upon to do several different missions. Somebody has to back off and say, I can do with less of this, but I've got to have more of that, and be ready to pay for it.
Anytime you talk performance in an aircraft, you're talking about compromise, which are trade-offs depending on what you're looking for in the airplane.
The designers of the A6 made a compromise, but by making that compromise, we are able to carry a large weapons load. We can carry 15,000 pounds of external stores, and we can carry it pretty well to the fringes of the envelope. The A6 is a very stable airplane, and as you learn in elementary aerodynamics, when you get that stability, you trade off some maneuverability. Yet the A6 is very maneuverable. You got heavy stick forces. You feel like you might be driving a Mack truck as compared to some more maneuverable airplanes, but it will maneuver, and it'll put bombs on target in any condition.
It maintains its energy.
If you're doing 360 knots running in on a target for a pop-up attack, you can cob it and pull up, and you'll have 300 knots for the rolling. You'll have that airspeed. You've got a 10,000 deck to 10,000 foot pop-up capability with about a 300 knots.
And to put it on the target with the accuracy that the A-6 can deliver the ordnance and get home with enough gas left to go to an alternate.
Performance is only part of the story. The hottest airplane in the inventory isn't worth the hangar space it occupies if you can't rely on it consistently. And anytime you're dealing with a sophisticated weapon system, you're faced with problems of availability and maintainability. Readiness is what it's all about. Pilots never want to miss a sortie, and maintenance personnel pride themselves on quick turnarounds to meet demanding flight schedules. With the system reliability of the A-6E, aircraft can be turned around in 45 minutes. And intruder squadrons are making more sortie commitments with total weapon system capability. A built-in test system helps the crew determine status of the various A-6E weapon system components in a matter of minutes. A complete operational check can be accomplished in less than half an hour. Go, no-go in under 15 minutes. The crew knows exactly what they have to work with before they take off. And the bombardier navigator is often able to troubleshoot in-flight malfunctions while in the air, providing a more meaningful debrief back on the deck. To package this kind of capability in one aircraft, and then to keep that aircraft an effective fighting machine over the years in the face of constantly changing technologies and new threats, takes a lot of airplane to start with, and a continuous program of product improvement. Even now, the A-6E has improved means for acquiring and identifying targets, and for delivering weapons with greater accuracy than ever before, at night and in any weather conditions. A tram version of the Intruder with a forward-looking infrared display, or FLIR, provides television-like pictures of targets that can't be seen by the unaided eye, nor sharply delineated by the sweeping now you see it, now you don't image on a typical radar scope. Using temperature differences to generate the display, FLIR can help A-6 crew members target an enemy tank, a ship's waterline or concealed cargo, and deliver smart laser-guided weapons. Even non-radar significant road patterns and plowed fields can be clearly distinguished. The A-6E is also being equipped to deliver the standoff Condor missile, a self-navigating, television-guided system effective at long range against ship and land-based targets. The unmatched versatility of the A-6E and its seemingly endless potential for assuming still greater capabilities is in keeping with the basic design considerations for the aircraft. A flexible weapon system, effective in a limited war or an all-out offensive.
There's always been a lot of discussion, I think, about the virtues of a very cheap air-to-ground tactical airplane as opposed to the much more expensive all-weather, all-purpose, multi-mission aircraft such as the A-6 is. I think we've proved without question in Southeast Asia the value and the requirement for a more sophisticated, more capable aircraft than what perhaps the cheapest version we can put on a carrier deck would provide. We proved it nightly from all the carriers in the 7th Fleet.
Well, okay, good morning. That's an introduction to the A6, which we'll be talking about for the next hour or so. My name is Nellie Paler, and there's some bio information on that sheet. I was born in Puerto Rico, so my real name is Nelson Feliz Paler Ayala. But when the family transitioned over to New York, we settled in the South Bronx. And you can't go around with a name like that in the South Bronx. So I became Nellie Paler, and Nellie Paler I have remained for the last 70 years or so. Anyway, that was one of the things that I thought I'd point out. While I was on active duty in the Marine Corps, and I was on active duty from 62 to 87, I had several tours as an instructor. One of the things I learned in the first tour as an instructor was that what you need to do in military instruction is tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And usually some of that will stick. So basically what we're going to talk about today, what I'm going to talk about today, is a little bit about myself, a little bit about the A6, a little bit about the air war in Vietnam, and then tell you some of my personal stories from my 2 tours in Vietnam. a first tour in Chu Lai, just south of Da Nang, on a Marine base. And the second tour was with a squadron that was deployed on a carrier, the USS Coral Sea. And that was, the first tour was 68 to 69, the second tour was 71 to 72. So that's where I'm at. Okay, as you saw from the movie, the A-6 was designed to be a long-range, all-weather bomber. And it had a nuclear capability, so everything that it was designed to do was basically drop bombs and drop different types of bombs, including nuclear bombs. So now, our training was essentially to do exactly that. It was one of the first aircraft where they said, this person in the right seat, the weapon system operator, and in the A-6 he's called a bombardier navigator or a BN, this person with his, do we have the slide of the cockpit, Mike?
No.
We don't, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I wish we had a slide of the cockpit, but what I'd like to tell you is that the right-hand side of that airplane that you saw, those two, the pilot and the BN sitting side by side, the BN is slightly back a few inches, maybe a couple of, if you were to crash, it would be a microsecond later. Anyway, the bombardier navigator has a search radar, and that radar, when it's being used, has a boot or a big tunnel that you stick your head into. The bombardier navigator sticks his head into that, and adjusting the different dials and switches can refine the picture so that he can see where the airplane is going. Now, that radar is tied into the system called DIAN, Digital Integrated Attack and Navigation Equipment. Those signals are sent into DIAN, and DIAN then sends a signal to the pilot, who then all he has to do is center the steering button on his little scope on his side and follow it. The airplane will fly you to a release point for whatever weapon system you have selected in your system. So basically, if the system is working, the bombardier navigator, it has an inertial system for navigational purposes. All of this is all tied in together, and the bombardier navigator is playing with all of these buttons and switches and getting that information updated, and he uses the radar in order to do exactly that. So his workload is fairly high. The pilot, on the other hand, just has to fly the airplane, make sure that it's running. Lots of times we used to joke that one of the things that the bombardier navigator would have to do is every now and then take a banana and hand it over to give the pilot something constructive to do. But at any rate, suffice it to say, the workload of the bombardier navigator was fairly intensive. And when you were flying the mission, especially a night, low-level mission where you're armed with 18 or 28 500-pounders, and you're flying between 300 and 500 feet above the ground at night, you have to be, the adrenaline is really going. And will keep on going.
Let me see if I can, they had an image of the cockpit.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me see if I can quickly get to it.
Okay. So the bottom, what I mean to say is not that the pilot is not doing any work. Obviously, he is doing some work. But that bombardier navigator is really got his hands full, literally. Now, okay, let's see. Okay, this is the pilot side. See?
Okay. There was a good one with showed radar.
Yeah.
That's pilot.
Okay, that's still the pilot. Probably the reason they can't show the bombardier navigator is because his head is in the boot and it covers up a lot of the.
Tell us what the purpose of the boot is.
Well, the boot is basically, especially at night, to keep the radar returns, the picture, the image, the light that's coming from that radar from blinding the pilot. So in essence, the BN keeps his head in this boot like this, and he's working with with both hands trying to make adjustments. And you've got a weapons panel in the middle where you select the weapons that you're going to be dropping and the sequencing of those weapons and how they're dropped. And all of this is happening on the right-hand side.
And the booth during the daytime keeps from blanching out the picture from sunlight.
Exactly. So
There's
it's
a picture of you on the right and the pilot on the left, right? What you see out the window.
yeah, okay. The only problem is it just does not show the
I don't even know why they put windows on the right-hand side.
yeah, especially you could go.
Notice the beam is lower and behind. I just wanted,
Yeah,
Okay.
It says nothing about his social status.
So what are we looking at?
Okay, now this is the radar. This is the search radar without the boot, without the thing on it. And they did that probably in order to take this picture and make this video. The thing about it is it's surrounded by all of the buttons and controls that you use in order to refine the picture. And then in the middle of the cockpit, between the BN's knees, you've got a console that has a stick, and that stick is and a little keyboard to enter latitude and longitude for navigational purposes. And the stick is also to get the cursors that are on the search radar. They'll come out like this. It'll be a vertical one and a horizontal one at the crosshairs is where you want your target, and that's what you maneuver around with that stick. And when you put that on the target, that's what the airplane will be flying towards.
So what's this green above?
That's the picture.
That's a FLIR. Those came in the late 70s, early 80s. We didn't have that in Vietnam. So, yeah.
That's where in the earlier model, that's where the bananas were stored. Kind of like a glove compartment.
Now that FLIR, and I wish I had been flying in that generation of A6s because that FLIR refines the target selection process. It's like a little television screen, and what you do is you put the cursors right where you want it. You could even put it on the front wheels of the truck, as opposed to just a truck or just a road, which is what we could do. The search radar had a mode called MTI, Moving Target Indicator, in which if the vehicle was moving more than 2 or 3 miles per hour, that the Doppler effect of the radar return would show that as a blip on your screen. You could put your cursors on that and bomb it. And that's one of the things we did in Vietnam. So that was available while we were in Vietnam.
And just point out, Nellie, that with the computer, the ordnance delivery part of the Diane system would take into account the moving vector of the target on the ground and compensate for that so that bombs would go where it's going to be when the bombs hit. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, that was part of the sophistication of the system. If you have a moving target and your airplane is dropping it on a set point, then the target is going to be gone. So it has to compensate and include the actual speed of the target in the solution for the bomb drop.
Did I read at one point there was a lot of problems though with the early versions of all of that, the electronics?
Never fly the A model of any airplane. And so we flew the A6A through both of my tours, and what we had was problems with almost every part of the system. And one of the things that we learned in going through the training, the RAG, the replacement air group training, is that this is what you do when this breaks. This is what you do when that breaks. This is what you do when this other thing won't function. This is what you do when this goes out. And so what you're doing in your training is you're figuring out, okay, what is the most degraded system that we can go and actually drop bombs on a target. And it comes down to this. With the search radar, you can have what is called a manual range line, which you can adjust. And if you know the altitude and the airspeed and the type of ordnance that you're dropping, all of which you know beforehand, then you have that set in. And if everything goes wrong, you have a manual range line, and you go to the altitude that you selected, the ordnance, and then you can drop. Now, if you don't have that search radar, then you're left with the pilot has to take the airplane up in the air, turn around, and dive bomb visually. You can't do that at night. Yeah, obviously, you can't do that at night. So that would work in the daytime, but it would not work at night. Or in bad weather, absolutely. So, okay, that's a little bit about myself. That's a little bit about the A6 and the systems and the problems that we had with that systems. And that was the challenge of those tours. Yeah, question?
No, they just showed a picture of the navigator there.
Yeah, there he is and believe me, he spent a lot of time in that boot. Okay, so
The yellow helmet goes with the bananas.
So that's the newer type.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about what happened in Vietnam before we got there. We got there in one of the things that I forgot to mention this was before I became a bombardier navigator, or an NFO, which is Naval Flight Officer, I served a tour as a communications officer. And I was stationed at Camp Pendleton and deployed in 1965, in May of 65, deployed to Okinawa en route to a place called Vietnam. Well, I didn't get to Vietnam because they said, we need some volunteers to stay here on Okinawa and man the communications center, which for the division, the rear communications center. I said, I'll do that. So myself, a couple of officers, and about 30 enlisted, we augmented the 1st MARDIV rear comm center. So the rest of the company went down to Vietnam, and I stayed on Okinawa for 6 months. Then I got out, and when I left, I went back to New York, and I did what I had intended to do, which was teach junior high school English in the same neighborhood that I grew up in. Well, I did that for about 6 months, and I realized I've taken a 30% pay cut from being a first lieutenant in the Marine Corps to being a teacher in the Bronx. I said, that's not going to fly for long. So what I did is I asked Headquarters Marine Corps, can you send me back on active duty, but I want to go to flight training? And they said, yes, we can. All you have to do is come back on active duty, and then we'll send you to flight training. I said, no, I spent 3 years in I know how the Marine Corps works. If I'm back on active duty, I'm yours, and that's it. So if you don't send me back to flight training, I ain't coming back. I said, okay. They actually wrote an order enabling me to go from my home in the Bronx down to Pensacola for Naval Flight Officer training. Now, when I got down there, I said, I'd really like to be a naval aviator. I'd like to be a pilot. They said, we don't need pilots as much as we need naval flight officers, because we've got these aircraft called the F-4 and the A-6 that have an extra seat, and we need to put people in that extra seat. So even though I was physically qualified for pilot training, because of the needs of the service, which is something that anybody who's been in the military understand, I went through NFO training and became a bombardier navigator.
How long did that take?
What's that?
How long was the training?
The training was, started around January of 67, and I got my wings in August of 67. And then I had some more training to do, and I wound up at Cherry Point in December of 67. And from December of 67 to September of 68, I was doing the RAG training. I went through the very first A6 training squadron, which was VMAT AW202. I was in the first class. Now, by then, and this is what I was going to get into, the squadrons, the Marine Corps A6 squadrons that we had been to Vietnam for a while. So let me just, I'll get to that. In 1965, we started the war against Vietnam, North Vietnam. The first deployment of A6s was in June of 1965 aboard a carrier. I think it was the Independence. And the first A6 to be shot down was in July of 65. Okay, so from the first Marine Squadron didn't arrive in Vietnam until October of 66. And that was the bats of VMA AW242. Now that VMA AW, the Marine Corps calls it VMA, fixed wing, medium attack, all weather, and then the number of the squadron. So it's VMA AW242, the bats. And they arrived in October of 66. The second squadron was VMA AW533. They arrived in April Fool's Day of 1967. And so we had 2 squadrons in Vietnam. Both of the squadrons were, let's see, here's Da Nang. The 242 Bats were in Da Nang, and then the Nighthawks of 533 were in Chu Lai, which is just about 40, 50 miles south of Da Nang. So that's so okay. From 1965 to 1967, the air war against North Vietnam was being primarily fought by the Air Force, and obviously with the Air Force from one side and the Navy from the Gulf of Tonkin. When the A-6s arrived, one of the things that they were told was that you guys are the night arm of our bombing campaign. So each of the A-6 squadrons that was in Vietnam, augmented by the squadron that was on the carrier, would fly approximately 8 sorties a night into Vietnam. Now, Vietnam, if you look at one of these maps, that has the route packages right here. These route packages, beginning from the southern part. Okay. Beginning down here, which is, oops.
That's the night shot.
Okay. This is South Vietnam, and here's the DMZ. Okay, route packages go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6A, 6B. 6A and 6B.
That's not good.
Okay. This is when systems go down. Okay.
But you learn to work with a degraded system.
There you go. Okay. 6A is Hanoi, the area around Hanoi. 6B is Haifang, which is right there on the coast, and the area in. This whole area is about 3/4 of the size of California, and the entire the armament systems in this country this was the most heavily defended piece of real estate in the world. This had something like 200 surface-to-air missile sites, 8,000 AAA gun emplacements, and all sorts of other armaments, so that once an aircraft went over any part of this, that aircraft was in trouble, or was very potentially in a lot of trouble. It was that difficult to fly. So flying at night helped because they couldn't see you, and they couldn't see you coming. So how would you do it? Well, what you would do is you'd go down as low as you could, usually starting about 500 feet above the ground, and you'd figure out 2 miles on either side of my flight track. I want to know what is the highest piece of real estate or the highest object around there, so that if I have to avoid AAA, I'll know that I've got something that I've got to go over. So you had to know 2 miles on either side of your track. Now, you'd go down as low as you could. Start out at 500 feet above ground, and then you'd listen for the radars. If you were being painted by the enemy radar, then you'd go down lower, and you'd do that incrementally. And so eventually you'd get to the point where you're not being tracked, and so you have a clear path to your target. Now, this took a lot of crew coordination and a lot of belief in the abilities of each other. The pilot had to believe that that guy knows what he's doing, and you practice, when you're back home, you practice radar navigation through the mountains so that you could see which way to go. Okay, turn left here, we've got 4 miles until we get to a mountain on the left, et cetera, et cetera. And you could talk the pilot through the route. And you could do this at daytime or at night. Obviously, you practice it in the daytime so you could do it at night. And when you got to the target, all of the weapon systems had been armed, and the pilot just had to fly the airplane, pop up enough so that when they released the ordnance, the fragments from the exploding weapons would not damage the aircraft, and then just turn it away and go away. So now, between Okay, the A6s would come out of Da Nang, which is Da Nang or Chulai down here, and fly up along the Gulf of Tonkin and then go dry, stay up at altitude. Then they would go down to low levels when they're about 25 miles off the coast. So they'd be out of the range of surface-to-air missiles, and then they would fly in, depending on what target they were assigned, they would fly in at low level. And they'd be trying to fly as fast as they could, usually a little over 400 miles, 420 miles, or 420 knots. That was pretty good, as was mentioned in the film. Even with the drag of the bombs, the A6 could still fly relatively fast. And anyway, in 1968, January, there's an event called Tet happened. Okay, when Tet occurred, then we had a tremendous blowback, primarily caused by a lot of the media coverage of what was happening. Although we actually, as a military force, killed a lot of North Vietnamese, and the media coverage was such that everybody thought that we were losing the war. And so what happened at the end of that year, in November of '68, President Johnson declared a bombing pause. And so from then on, no targets above the DMZ were attacked by our air assets. And that bombing pause went on until December of 1971. Okay, so for about 3 years. Now, I got there just as the pause had started in November of '68, so the missions that I flew from November '68 until October of '69 were essentially the types of missions we flew were the beacon mission, which is what was mentioned in there, where the ground troops on the ground had what's called a RabFac beacon, was a transponder, and that beacon, when it's turned on and emitting a signal, appears on the search radar. Search radar, all you have to do is put your cursors on it, and from that beacon signal, he'll tell you, okay, 1,000 meters at 090, I want you to drop some bombs. And that's exactly where the computer system will fly the airplane and drop the bombs to. It worked very well. I flew about 200 missions. Almost a quarter of them, 44 of them, were beacon missions during my first tour. And those were some of the most satisfying missions that I flew, because we knew we were helping the people, the guys on the ground, and we could actually see the results of it. Many of those were at night, and some of those were at daytime. The best flight that we had a flight where it was intermittent weather, where it was cloudy and open, and we were supporting it was a Marine unit, and they had a beacon, and we dropped 2 bombs as a spotter, and we had some detonations. The guy says, give me the rest, and typically we carried 22 500-pound bombs on those beacon missions because they were right there fairly close to where our home base, so we had plenty of loiter time. And so we dropped the remainder of those 22 missions, and we had all sorts of fireworks. Apparently, it was an ammunition cache that had been sighted, and when we destroyed, the guys on the ground were great, we love you. Well, we'll come back as soon as we can. So the other types of mission were called armed recce missions. These armed recce missions were nighttime missions, and you would fly those in Laos and Cambodia, right around here. So we'd take off from, we'd take off from Da Nang or Chulai down here, and we'd fly in here. And lots of times we were under the control of an Air Force AC-130, which is a Spectre gunship. And this is a C-130 that has all sorts of weaponry and radar and has a crew there, and they would spot targets for you. One of the big setbacks from flying these armed recce missions was that if you weren't working with your own systems, many times, because of the conditions on the ground, you have to remember this Laos and Cambodia territory had lots of fires that were burning constantly. And there was no visual reference, no horizon, so that you couldn't tell the difference between the fires on the ground, which were very small, especially you're up at 18,000 feet, and you could tell the difference between that and the stars. And what happened during my tour in March of '69, we had a crew that was flying one of these armed Reccis, and what happened to them was that they spotted the target and they rolled in to bomb the target, and then the pilot apparently got disoriented, and instead of pulling up, he pulled down, and there was a huge crash and explosion at 6 o'clock of the target. That happened to our squadron, and it happened to our sister squadron up at Da Nang about a month later. So these armed Recci missions were of questionable value and certainly not worth losing a couple of airplanes over. So other types of missions that we flew were something called Tpq missions. I'm not even sure what Tpq stands for. It was just a radar-controlled mission where you're flying at about 20,000 feet, and you tell the controller that you've got 22 500-pound bombs. He says, how long can you stay on station? And he said, well, we've got about an hour and 15 minutes. And they say, what? He says, yeah, this is an A6. Typically, the F4s would say, 10 minutes, maybe. Five. So if you tell them you have almost an hour of loiter time, then they'll run you around and tell you. Big problems, they'll have you drop the ordnance in various quantities. Give me half a dozen here, give me 4 here, etc. Now, one of the things that is dangerous was something like this. An A6 can carry 15,000 pounds of bombs. If that would be 15 1,000-pounders. We can carry 10,000 pounds of bombs. We can carry 5 2,000-pounders, and that's one on each of the wing of the stations. The problem with that, and this is we found out in the squadron that I was in, was that if these Tpq controllers say, we'd like to have all 5 of these 2,000-pounders at the same time, can you do that? The pilot looked at the BN, I don't know why not. So they did, and they pickled off these 5 2,000-pounders. The aircraft just went up and down and pegged the G-meter both positively and negatively. When they got back to maintenance and they landed the airplane, the maintenance people took an inspection of it. They found cracks in the wings. and everybody said, don't ever do that again, otherwise you're going to be grounded. And that's essentially, so these are some of the things that happened. The Tpq missions, like the AR missions, I think were of questionable value. We never got any BDA or any assessment on what we had actually hit, if anything. So basically, I suspect that for many of those missions, what we did is we made splinters out of trees. And that's I hate to say that, but that's I think what happened. Okay, so, okay. Yes?
I just had a question. I don't know if it was like south of DMZ, if you encountered any of this at any time or over Laos or Cambodia. But did you ever encounter or see any North Vietnamese?
We did not in Laos or Cambodia, and I don't think most of the MiG 17s, 19s, and 21s stayed around the Hanoi area. I think they had about 4 airports up there, and which is an interesting point because those airports, even before the bombing pause, the bombing halt, they were only permitted in October of '67. They permitted the A6s and the other aircraft to bomb those airfields. You start thinking about it. Wait a minute, we've been fighting North Vietnam for 2 years, and we don't bomb their airfields?
Yeah.
Well, this poses another question here. A lot of the targeting for this particular war was done at the Joint Chiefs, SecDef, and White House level. So they would have a list of targets, and they would select the targets, and then that would be promulgated via the 7th Air Force down in Saigon, and that would then come out to us on the carriers or up in Da Nang and Chu Lai. So we had no say in the types of targets that were selected. And I thought, and I still think, that it's crazy to send some of your best assets in such a high-threat environment to hit targets of questionable value. Yeah, it just made no sense whatsoever. And that's something that I've got to say that the one thing that I would say is that of the fellows that I flew with, we all looked at each other and says, it's an order. We have to do this. And they did it. We did it. And nobody said, no, I'm too sick to fly, I don't like that target. Everybody knew when it was their turn in the pickle barrel, okay, I've got to go because it's my mission.
Well, they definitely learned during the Gulf War because then, of course, they
exactly
hit airfields and
sure.
industry.
Sure. From a tactical standpoint, if you're at war with a country, an adversary, what do you do? How do you treat them? Do you say, oh, we'll bomb everything except the things that are really important to you, or that kind of stuff? It just makes, and that's essentially what we did in Vietnam. So those are some of the frustrations of my first tour. Now, and one final thought on that first tour. When I got there, I was an individual aircrew replacement. So I showed up in November of '68. I was by myself. I wound up in Chulai. And then it gave me a week to get acclimated, get all my shots and stuff like that. And then I started flying. That month, the month of December, I flew like 24 missions. I flew with 14 different pilots. We did not have the crew concept that they had earlier and that we were to have when I went back with 224 on the Coral Sea. And that crew concept is very important because you can fly with the same person all the time. You get to know each other and you get to know your capabilities and you have a lot of confidence in the individual, and there's a lot of things that are even unsaid that are taken for granted because you've been together. I guess it's in many ways it's like a marriage. You're with each other, you're very important to each other, and you're looking out for each other. You're not going to do something stupid because of that relationship, and that sort of a bond is created.
Nellie,
yes.
Remember, we got there.
Okay. Quickly, I went back to Cherry Point after my tour ended in December of '69. Went back to Cherry Point, spent a year as an instructor there at the Weapons Training Unit, and then joined VMA AW 224 that was just ginning up to go on the USS Coral Sea. So on Coral Sea, we got together, we got the 20 crews together, and we trained and carrier qualified in order to deploy from Alameda, California, the Naval Air Station, aboard the USS Coral Sea. Now, we went from Cherry Point to San Francisco, basically, and joined the ship there. We trained for 2 months with the Air Wing, and we did a lot of the Air Wing training that needed to be done in order for us to participate. For those of you who are not familiar, an Air Wing on a carrier consists of about 5 squadrons. We had 2 F-4 squadrons, 2 A-7 squadrons, and an A-6 squadron. The A-6 squadron was called the medium attack, the A-7s is light attack, and the F-4s are fighters, and they also do bombing. So you have about 60 airplanes there. In addition to our 12 A-6s on Coral Sea, we had 3 A-6Bs, which are the anti-radiation, the ones, and we got those after we were out at the Gulf of Tonkin, 3 of them. We also had 3 Ka-6D tankers because they are a variant of the A-6, and they're the ones who provide the fuel for the air wing during what's called cyclic ops. Every 90 minutes on a carrier, you have a flight evolution. You launch aircraft, the aircraft go do their mission, and then they return. At that time, you have an airborne tanker who's around in case anybody needs gas. For your information, the F-4s, typically they launch, and they say, tanker, tanker, and they're looking for the tanker because they want to top off and make sure they have enough gas to do their mission. And when they come back, before they land, they'll typically want to tank again. So that's what that Ka-6 does. Sometimes the tanker will help the F-4s or the fighters who are up on what's called bar cap off the coast of North Vietnam. Do we have our map? Okay. Okay, that's all right. Okay, off the coast of North Vietnam, around Haifang, just off the coast, the fighters would be airborne flying circles, trying to see if there's any MiGs that were airborne. And if they find any airborne MiGs, then they would go attack them. So you'd want to have a tanker up there to provide some fuel for them so they don't have to go all the way back to the carrier. Okay, so we got there in December of '71. Okay, I mentioned that in December of '71 was the bombing pause ended, and that's exactly the time that we got there. So my timing for the second tour was not as good as for the first tour. The bombing of North Vietnam commenced at the end of December, near the end of December of 71, and that meant, generally speaking, that what you had were large groups of aircraft flying in formation with ordnance, surrounded by electronic warfare behind them to protect them from the enemy radars, and fighter escorts on either side. So you have a group of between 30 and 40 aircraft. The bombers are in the middle, and they're flying towards a target. They're all flying at about 24 to 28,000 feet. And they get to a target, and then what happens is they roll in sequence, and they drop their ordnance on the target. The idea being that you get maximum amount of ordnance on a single target in a short period of time. That's the concept. Okay? The problem is, in those 3 years, North Vietnam had not expended any of their surface-to-air missiles, so they had accumulated, and they had not expended very much of their AAA. So the first couple of months that we were flying into North Vietnam, almost every time we had something, and these were called alpha strikes. These were invented for the Vietnam War. These alpha strikes basically cost us airplanes. In the squadron that I was in, we lost 4 airplanes. And we lost 4 crew members. We had 1 POW, and let's see, I think that was it. Okay. So that was what was happening. So in the flight operations went on from December of 71 until we left Yankee Station in July of 72. In that period of time, the Air Force ramped up their strikes, beginning with the linebacker series of attacks. And the linebacker series were the B-52s that were flying, and they were bombing the entire Hanoi, Haifang, route package 6A and 6B area. We lost a number of B-52s as well there. So it was not, and again, now that the targets were pretty much, the gloves were off, and the targets that we were able to attack were viable targets, that's when the North Vietnamese decided to negotiate some peace terms. And so we were there until, like I said, July of 72. What did I learn from that whole thing? The one thing that we did besides the alpha strikes, we would do arm recce's along route packages 1 through 5. And in May of 1972, May 9th, our A-6 squadron, the Bengals of 224, led the mining of Haifang Harbor. 1972, the war started in 1965. If I'm not mistaken, that's 7 years. Why did we wait 7 years before mining the harbor through which they got all their war material from all of the Eastern European countries that were supporting the North Vietnamese? I have no idea. I do know that President Nixon made a speech as the mines were being dropped in Haifang Harbor, telling the ships that were in the harbor that they had 72 hours to leave because the mines had a delay of 72 hours. Why would we do that? I'm not sure. So we got back in July of 72 and returned. I went on to different assignments and stuff like that. What did I get out of the second tour? Again, pretty much what I learned from the first tour, which is a lot of the tactics and stuff that we were using, a lot of the utilization of the aircraft was questionable at best. Because we had our hands tied in the things that we could do. The arm recce's, the TPQs, those things were just bore holes in the sky and drop bombs, and that's about it. So I would say that with the exception of the things we accomplished, the mining of Haifang Harbor, the ability to support our ground troops, those would be the things that were best. What we got from the crew concept of the second tour, because we were crewed together, I flew 60% of my hops with the same guy on Coral Sea. So of the 100 and so missions, I flew 60-something with the same person. And we knew each other. It was minimum talk. We got in the airplane. We knew what we were going to do. We had planned our flights, et cetera. So that showed me that works really well. I would say that those 2 tours were part of my life because they have made me essentially who I am, and they taught me the things that I think are important, and that is that the support of your fellow crew members, and I think many of us who have served on active duty know that many of the things that we do on active duty are usually because we are supporting the person next to us, and on either side, and that's something that you have to think. Now, I've taken up a lot of time. Bear, it's your turn.